Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, we've got Chinese investment and debt under control, insist African leaders as the China-Africa summit in Beijing wraps up. The two sides insist the relationship's aimed at helping the continent's economies. Also, South Africa's economy falls into recession, compounding concerns about its weakening currency, plans for land reform, and fallout from state corruption under former President Jacob Zuma. And talking robots in Ethiopia. It's home to one of the tech firms behind some of the world's most advanced artificial intelligence. We take a closer look. But first, the China-Africa summit in Beijing wrapped up on Tuesday. Amidst warnings that the vast Chinese financing of projects in Africa comes with strings attached, there was also insistence from Beijing that it's interested in more than just exploiting the continent's raw materials. Our correspondents tell us more.
Hosting all but one African nation in Beijing, President Xi Jinping hoped the forum would show the potential of his vast plan to connect China with Eurasia and Africa, the so-called Belt and Road Initiative.
Chinese and African leaders have reached significant common ground and spoken with one voice on all major issues.
But the two words that really dominated the summit were investment and debt. China pledged $60 billion for projects in Africa, the continent's rich in energy and raw minerals, which are vital to sustaining Chinese growth. But African countries lack the necessary infrastructure to extract and process these resources, creating a need for foreign capital. Beijing's promised loans, credit lines, development funds, and private investment. Some African leaders eager to access these funds have dismissed critics who see a form of neo-colonialism.
We agreed to work hard to increase Africa's value-added exports to China. And we are particularly pleased that President Xi and the government of the People's Republic of China is quite open and they welcome this development.
Embracing Chinese investment could lead countries into a cycle of debt. If they can't repay their loans, they could be forced to sell their newly built infrastructure back over to Beijing. In an attempt to assuage such fears, President Xi's doubled down on the win-win nature of this relationship, warning against governments using Chinese money for vanity projects that don't benefit the country as a whole. Beijing's also announced it would forgive the debt of Africa's poorest nations.
South Africa's tipped into recession for the first time in a decade. Two back-to-back quarters of negative growth to GDPs come as a surprise. The country is the continent's second largest economy, and there had been hopes that President Cyril Ramaphosa, who took office in February, would help reinvigorate South Africa's fortunes. But rising fuel prices, falling currency, and a massive 29% decline in agricultural output has prompted the downturn. Jane Flanagan joins us now with more from Cape Town. Jane, the recession's caught a lot of people by surprise. Talk us through a bit more about what the troubles are down to.
Well, as you say, people thought, analysts predicted that South Africa would narrowly escape being tipped into a recession. So today's announcement did catch people by surprise and really has added to a perfect storm for South Africa. You mentioned agriculture. There's a 30% downturn in agriculture. It seems people aren't planting. The nervousness over the land reform policy has made people very cautious about investing in the farming sector. We've also had the worst drought for more than 100 years. People aren't buying cars. People aren't spending money. People are really being very cautious with their money, and that means that the economy is not moving. We've inherited a very, Cyril Ramaphosa has inherited a very dormant economy from Jacob Zuma, which is he's failing to get going despite promises for radical economic reform. He's stated his ambition to attract $500 billion worth of investment from foreign speculators over the next 5 years. Today's news seriously will not be tempting them to spend their money in South Africa anytime soon.
So you mentioned there's some of the difficulties and challenges faced by Ramaphosa. There had been hopes that things would pick up under him. Bear in mind, he's only been in the job for 6 months. Can any of this really be laid at his feet?
Well, he did inherit a very sluggish economy. And I think many of those chickens under Jacob Zuma's rule are now coming home to roost. So he's inherited an incredible amount of issues, which are really only now being understood in what long-term and short-term impact they're having. We've got a state capture inquiry going on where we're really hearing the full extent to which Jacob Zuma opened up his regime to be corrupted by a very small number of individuals. And this isn't going to tempt overseas investors and give them much confidence in the economy at the moment. But his land reform policy, his promise to expropriate land without compensation if he gets to change the constitution to allow that to happen, certainly isn't giving foreign investors an awful lot of confidence. And I think that has led to the devaluation of the rand, which we've seen happen in recent weeks. That announcement happened very early on in his since he became president back in February. And so I think that some of the problems, although he's inherited many of them from Jacob Zuma, some of them can be attributed to the lack of security and certainty he's given to that particular issue, which I think is really very keen, which to set the tone for stability, for land ownership and land security going forward in South Africa.
Thanks very much. Jane Flanagan there for us in Cape Town. Now, 5 pupils are reportedly missing after their school was attacked by gunmen in Cameroon. It happened in Bafut on Monday as the new academic year kicked off. Now, that's not far from Bamenda, which is the capital of the Anglophone region in the northwest of the country, at the centre of calls for secession from the Francophone majority nation. Separatists say that the education system marginalises English-speaking pupils and have decreed a boycott of schools in areas they lay claim to. In Tunisia, some rural communities struggle to access clean drinking water. Corruption, illegal drilling, blockades of dams are all partly to blame for the shortages, but those problems are exacerbated by increasingly frequent droughts. Our correspondents report.
In this village in northwest Tunisia, the only water available is from the local public fountain. Locals share it with their animals, as their homes no longer have running water.
It isn't clean. There can be diseases in this water. On top of that, I'm tired. I spend all my time coming here to get water.
Every day, Ammar makes at least 5 trips, carrying jerry cans of water back and forth to provide for his family and his livestock's needs. For 2 years, he hasn't had water from his taps. His family insists they never missed a water payment.
The officials would tell me, if you don't have water, it's because you didn't pay. Here are my receipts. It's not true. I always pay my bills.
3 years of drought have also seen the water table fall. That's made shortages worse, and local technicians say supplies are unreliable and stretched.
People come and ask for me to open the valve and give them water. What's the point? There isn't enough water.
The priority is for those who live far from the public fountain and who have no nearby well. But there, the water arrives in a trickle.
Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we stay 3 days without water. It's really random.
These aren't isolated cases in Tunisia. The country has been living through water stress for several years, and poor management has caused a water crisis.
We have a multitude of problems, whether local or at the regional level. We know that each region has its own challenges, and we have not taken into account many factors, such as climate change, the cost of water, or energy.
This NGO catalogues citizens' grievances about the lack of water. Every year there are more protests, with at least 172 recorded between May and July this year alone.
Ethiopia is home to one of the tech firms behind some of the world's most advanced artificial intelligence. It's a nascent tech industry that developers are hoping to see boosted by government reform. Alison Sargent has more.
I am thrilled and honored to be here at the United Nations.
Her first language may be English, But Sophia, the humanoid robot, also speaks a little Amharic. That's because while she was created by a firm in Hong Kong, part of her software is Ethiopian. Developed by a team of AI engineers at ICOG Lab in the country's capital.
We are in the leading edge of AI and blockchain. But nobody thinks that this image is true. Nobody thinks that this is the reality.
In just 5 years, ICOG Lab has grown from a team of 4 to dozens of programmers working with clients from the US to China to the Ethiopian government. They recently launched a nationwide program teaching high school and university students the foundations of coding and entrepreneurship. The company's founder believes that Ethiopia could become a global leader in technology, but they'll have to overcome barriers like limited internet access and offer more support to young developers.
If a kid in Gambella, if he creates software and he wants to expand it across the Africa or Ethiopia, if you go investment office, there is no incentive for software developers or exporters. There is no category.
The programmer says he has hope in the country's leadership. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed used to hold the science and technology portfolio. In power since March, he's promised major reforms to boost the country's private sector.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.